Red clay dust rose from the worn gravel road that wound through the endless fields of grass and scattered mesquite trees. The mid-afternoon heat pressed against the land, and the horizon shimmered in the distance, hinting at more dryness to come. A tall, reinforced gate loomed ahead, guarded by armed sentinels who rarely questioned any arrivals. Beyond that gate stretched the estate of a man known to the public as a successful rancher who supplied premium cuts to an extensive chain of steakhouses. Locals referred to him respectfully, aware of his fortune and his significant investments in local infrastructure. Few realized the deeper layers of his operation. He commanded hundreds of workers who tended his cattle, managed feed supplies, and handled logistical tasks that supported large-scale meat production. He funded local community projects, sponsored rodeos, and donated to political campaigns. In public, he spoke with careful courtesy, favoring crisp suits for official occasions and denim for televised ranch tours. His domain spanned tens of thousands of acres, a territory so vast that even experienced hands lost their bearings without a proper map. This immensity included lush pastures where prime beef cattle roamed, along with miles of rugged scrubland. Occasional thorny bushes and scraggly trees dotted that harsher region. Reporters visited periodically, capturing segments for national broadcasts interested in his business model. On camera, he appeared humble and decisive, always ready with statements about employing local labor and adhering to strict safety standards. The press found him approachable, although they could rarely book extended interviews without advanced notice. Late in the afternoon, he stood outside a sprawling stable building where veterinarians checked newly arrived livestock. A local television crew had been granted permission to film a brief interview for a feature on modern ranching. He wore a broad-brimmed hat and a pressed shirt, addressing the camera with measured confidence. He explained recent expansions in his distribution network. He outlined shipping logistics, praising the efficiency of local highways and the reliability of his trucking fleet. He displayed a calm demeanor, mentioning how the ranch's success stemmed from a harmony between land stewardship and advanced meat processing technology. The segment concluded quickly. Once the cameras powered down, he excused himself with polite remarks, then disappeared behind a sturdy metal door that led to a restricted corridor. Fluorescent lights illuminated bare concrete walls. He exchanged quick words with a security chief who carried a clipboard full of inventory sheets. Their conversation remained low. The hallway ended at a locked office. There, he slipped behind a large desk cluttered with schedules, supply proposals, and something sealed in a plain envelope. He studied a stack of photographs that depicted a figure with unusual physical attributes. His expression shifted, losing any warmth he exhibited earlier. He examined each image with concentrated intensity. The subject appeared lean, muscular, and alert. A note indicated that this individual came from a far-flung region in South America. Additional scribbles suggested an extraordinary capacity for regeneration, heightened strength, and fierce resistance to conventional restraints. He set the photographs aside. A faint grin crossed his face. His plan required absolute secrecy, and he anticipated challenges that would surpass routine hunts. He buzzed a subordinate who entered quietly, stepping forward to receive instructions. The ranch owner requested thorough background checks on every participant expected to arrive for this exclusive engagement. He emphasized the need for absolute discretion. No mention of these events would reach the authorities, and no rumors would leak to outside parties. After the subordinate left, He locked the documents in a secure drawer. He glanced at the clock, aware that his carefully curated public persona required maintenance. He exited the office through a secondary corridor and reached a small courtyard behind the main building. A few ranch hands passed by, tipping their hats as they carried feed bags. He acknowledged them with curt nods and strode toward a waiting SUV. The driver held the door open. As the vehicle moved down a paved lane, he reflected on everything he had created. The ranch symbolized prosperity and mastery of natural resources, but it also served darker ambitions. He planned an event that only a select group would witness, each attendee paying dearly for the privilege of participation. Arriving at the main house, a sprawling structure of concrete and brick designed to impress. Inside, halls led to private suites, banquet rooms, and hidden corridors unknown to most employees. He stepped into his personal study, reviewing the set of photographs. This was the chosen quarry. The ranch owner rose before dawn the next day, stepping into a private control room located beneath the main house. This concealed space contained an array of monitors, each receiving live feeds from cameras stationed around the property. He inspected each feed, pausing when certain areas came into view. High wooden fences, guard towers, and reinforced gates formed a restrictive perimeter around several square miles of rugged terrain. He watched images of predators caged in remote enclosures. Large cats relocated from distant lands, massive reptiles that thrived in swampy corners, and other creatures not native to these latitudes. He had procured them through covert channels, relying on smugglers and complicit officials. This menagerie existed for one purpose: extreme hunts that catered to wealthy clients seeking something beyond conventional pursuits. He turned his attention to a small monitor showing a storage bay. There, a shipping container waited with special vents and heavy locks. A pair of hired handlers waited outside, occasionally casting anxious glances at the container's interior. The ranch owner took note of the sedation schedule pinned to the wall. This schedule indicated that the occupant needed a strictly administered dosage to remain compliant. An older man in a dark uniform appeared at the control room's entrance. He had served the ranch owner for many years, managing security details for high-risk events. The older man offered a curt nod and announced that all preparations were nearing completion. The hunts typically involved exotic beasts, but this time the situation stood apart from previous spectacles. The ranch owner dismissed the older man's cautious tone with a direct gesture. He stated that nothing was left to chance. He believed their current acquisition surpassed anything they had contained before. Proof of that lay in the protective measures arranged around the container. Thicker chains, custom tranquilizers, and multiple layers of locked barriers had been deployed. He then instructed the security manager to finalize the arrival protocols for invited participants. Each arrival required background verification, a signed non-disclosure agreement, and acceptance of personal risk. The events were illegal, yet money and influence paved the way for secrecy. High-level contacts ensured that local law enforcement closed its eyes to suspicious activity on the ranch's outskirts. While the manager departed, the ranch owner remained inside the control room, switching feeds with steady precision. Cameras revealed sections of scrub land riddled with hidden pitfalls, streams that cut across rocky ground, and thick tangles of brush. He had ordered this portion of the property converted into a contained park, though the word park carried an innocent tone that belied its purpose. Barbed wire fencing, electronic sensors, and natural obstacles rendered escape nearly impossible. Under fluorescent lighting, he reviewed archived recordings of previous hunts. Figures armed with modern rifles or custom bows once stalked big cats, elusive wolves, or foreign game. He noticed expressions of glee, tension, and triumph, Each confrontation ended with the inevitable kill, followed by a discreet disposal process that left no traces outside these boundaries. He paused at a particular clip showing a man from a prior event, running barefoot through shallow water as armed pursuers closed in. That chase concluded with one final shot and a triumphant roar from the paying client. The ranch owner remembered how that man's face had twisted in desperation. The memory did not unsettle him. Instead, it reinforced his conviction that power belonged to those willing to seize it by any means. Stepping away from the screens, he ascended a narrow set of stairs that led into a corridor behind the main kitchen. The aroma of frying bacon and fresh coffee drifted through the air. He encountered only a couple of staff members who acknowledged him with brief nods. He did not linger, continuing instead toward a small side exit. Once outside, he crossed a short distance to an adjacent building where more specialized personnel awaited. Inside, a research station held supplies of sedatives, tranquilizer darts, and various chemical agents. Some of these substances had been procured through unconventional sources, including an illicit pharmaceutical lab situated overseas. A few scientists and technicians operated under strict confidentiality contracts that forbade discussion of their work. He approached a glass storage cabinet containing vials labeled with cryptic codes. Bright overhead lights reflected on the metal countertops and the brushed steel flooring. One technician explained the potency of a newly formulated compound tested on large mammals in prior hunts. The ranch owner gave a slight nod, emphasizing that this time the target presented unprecedented attributes requiring extreme caution. He then inspected thick file folders detailing the subject's possible vulnerabilities. There were references to an Amazonian flower with properties that suppressed advanced healing capabilities. Preliminary tests hinted that concentrated gas derived from this plant could neutralize heightened physical strength for limited periods. He closed the file, intending to share those details only with a specific individual who would arrive soon. His next stop took him to a heavily guarded structure near the far edge of the compound. Concrete walls and angled barbed wire secured the outer perimeter. Inside, the shipping container stood on a raised platform. The occupant lay shackled, breathing slowly thanks to a reduced sedative dose. The ranch owner peered through a reinforced slot, witnessing faint movement. With a final glance, he confirmed that everything remained under control. Late morning light streamed over the long driveway leading to the main house. Luxury SUVs and sleek sedans arrived in a staggered sequence, each vehicle carrying individuals whose wealth and influence overshadowed ordinary concerns. Valets directed them toward reserved parking spaces near the main entrance, where uniformed staff offered refreshments. The ranch owner did not greet them personally, preferring to maintain a certain mystique until everyone had assembled. Inside, the newly arrived guests were shown to opulent suites or lounge areas. Each space had polished wood furnishings and state-of-the-art amenities. Well-trained attendants offered top-shelf liquor, premium cigars, and indulgent pastries flown in from exclusive bakeries. Some guests traveled with their own entourage, including bodyguards, personal assistants, or companions of ambiguous purpose. The first notable arrival represented Group A, led by an individual who controlled a network of casinos and adult entertainment ventures. He carried himself with a practiced swagger, wearing an expensive suit that contrasted with the ranch's rustic surroundings. His retinue included formidable-looking security personnel in matching suits, along with a few women dressed in attire that hinted at more than mere companionship. They proceeded through the foyer without commenting on the paintings or antique sculptures displayed along the walls. A short while later, Group B arrived. This faction comprised a business magnate who also held a political office. He possessed the polished mannerisms of someone accustomed to press conferences and televised debates. His group of hired specialists moved with disciplined efficiency, their bearing reminiscent of ex-military operatives. They spoke in hushed tones, scanning their surroundings as if expecting hazards behind every doorway. The final prominent faction that morning was Group C, arriving in 2 black SUVs with tinted windows. A noted figure in organized crime stepped out first, flanked by several companions who exuded an air of calculated menace. They walked slowly, observing every guard post and camera mount. Their leader appeared unruffled, wearing casual slacks and a collared shirt, projecting quiet authority. He acknowledged no one beyond a slight lift of the chin. Staff members directed each group to a large lounge area with panoramic windows overlooking rolling fields. An elegant arrangement of leather chairs and low tables formed a semicircle. One attendant discreetly checked whether the guests had any pressing requests. The caretaker of that lounge indicated that the ranch owner would join them shortly to outline the forthcoming activity. Tension hovered in the air even as polite smiles and mild pleasantries were exchanged. These individuals all recognized one another from previous gatherings in exclusive clubs or clandestine auctions. Their separate empires sometimes intersected, and their alliances shifted according to profit. Each faction felt an undercurrent of rivalry, magnified by the knowledge that tonight's event promised something beyond their usual brand of thrill. At last, the ranch owner entered with measured steps. He wore tailored clothing appropriate for a relaxed yet refined setting. He greeted them collectively, expressing appreciation for their presence. He spoke of the ranch's diverse environment, referencing advanced measures that guaranteed privacy. He alluded to a new kind of hunt, designed to push participants to their limits. Several among the assembled guests leaned forward, anticipating details. One of the casino owner's bodyguards murmured a question about weapon regulations. The ranch owner responded that standard firearms, specialized rifles, or even custom gear were permissible as long as it remained confined to the designated zones. The business magnate from Group B inquired about external interference, and the ranch owner reassured him that local authorities were kept at a distance. Group C's leader stayed silent, observing from the edge of the gathering. The ranch owner concluded the brief introduction by hinting that the prey would present unique challenges. He avoided specifics, suggesting that more details would be made clear once the hunt commenced. That omission only heightened interest among the participants, who seemed eager for any revelation. They anticipated something exotic, perhaps a lethal beast imported from a remote part of the world. Afterward, staff escorted each group to private areas where they could settle in. Fine wines and cold champagne were offered, along with elaborate meals that included expensive cuts of beef and fresh seafood. Muted conversations drifted across the lounge, speculation regarding the nature of the hunt, references to prior expeditions that had ended in carnage, and occasional boasts about personal trophies from previous outings. There was no illusion of morality here. Attendees understood that this event exceeded typical extremes. Before evening arrived, the ranch owner convened a final gathering in a more intimate salon with carefully guarded entrances. He revealed that the territory beyond the main compound contained hills, ravines, and thick brush, a perfect environment for both pursuit and ambush. He invited the guests to rest before the official briefing the next morning, leaving them to ponder the possibilities that lay ahead. Morning arrived under a dull sky, and a thin layer of fog clung to the edges of the open pasture. The ranch owner summoned the assembled guests to a spacious briefing room. Security personnel stood at strategic points around the perimeter, ensuring no uninvited individuals listened. A large map stretched across one wall, revealing a detailed layout of the ranch's wilderness sector. The ranch owner took his place before the map, addressing the group in a steady tone. He outlined the boundaries of the designated hunting zone, indicating ridges, deep washes, and stands of gnarled trees that dotted the landscape. He explained that cameras were placed in concealed positions, allowing for thorough observation. Yet he promised minimal intervention unless absolutely necessary. The goal was not to supervise, but to document. He stated that each faction should move independently. Private alliances could be formed at will, but the ranch's staff would not assist beyond providing initial directions. The hunt would commence by late afternoon, granting time for each party to gather its equipment and finalize strategies. He emphasized that once the chase began, there would be no easy retreat. He warned them that quitting would carry severe personal and financial consequences. A few members of Group A studied the map with an air of excitement, pointing out possible choke points and vantage spots. Their leader asked whether aerial drones were permitted. The ranch owner nodded, stating that any method could be employed as long as it did not compromise the secrecy of the operation. Satellite transmissions or outside communication were strictly forbidden. Group B's ex-military types marked coordinates on handheld devices, discussing how best to organize a sweep through the rough terrain. The business magnate offered them suggestions, but they decided among themselves. Group C's boss observed in silence for most of the briefing, occasionally speaking in low tones with one of his lieutenants. He asked only a single question: whether the target had been released into the wilderness. The ranch owner answered that sedation would be reduced at a precise hour, after which the figure would be free to roam. He did not describe the specifics, leaving participants to imagine a formidable quarry awaiting them. Shortly before the briefing ended, the ranch owner pointed to the final rule. No unauthorized observers were allowed inside the zone. Some might have considered bringing additional personnel to watch from an elevated position, but that was prohibited. He reminded everyone that any unexpected complications should be handled by the participants themselves. When the crowd dispersed, each group headed off to its assigned staging area. Group A's entourage checked high-powered rifles, scopes, and advanced tracking gear. They loaded boxes of ammunition and sorted through night vision devices. A handful of them appeared overly confident, dismissing concerns about hidden dangers. They had hunted large predators in foreign safari parks, and they believed their technology would ensure success. Group B focused on structure and discipline. Their leader consulted with his hired experts, drawing on their combat experience. They plotted likely travel routes for their prey, planning to drive it into certain corridors where crossfire would be optimal. They carried specialized rifles with suppressors, portable communication units, and enough supplies to operate for days if necessary. They expected to rely on formation tactics instead of brute force. Group C showed fewer outward preparations. They opened several metal cases that contained weapons of diverse calibers and uncertain origin. Their boss regarded each item with calm interest before nodding his approval. A subordinate produced a small sealed container whose contents remained hidden from curious onlookers. Their preparations appeared systematic but understated, implying knowledge gained through channels unavailable to others. Meanwhile, the ranch owner stepped into a surveillance hub. Several employees monitored camera feeds and motion sensors. He reminded them that they should not interfere once the hunt was in progress. Their role would be to maintain an electronic record of every movement. He authorized them to activate a special communication line only if a life-threatening emergency arose beyond the scope of the hunt's intentions. Afternoon crept forward, and the participants gathered at designated entry points along the boundary of the wilderness sector. The ranch owner arrived to confirm each group's readiness. Then he offered a simple statement: "The time has come." With that, he walked away, leaving them to proceed on foot or by specialized vehicles suited for rough terrain. Some used all-terrain trucks fitted with reinforced grills, while others proceeded on foot with backpacks of gear. Radio chatter within each faction began to fill the airwaves, though the ranch's main frequency stayed silent. There was no turning back. The operation was underway, fueled by adrenaline and the promise of a kill worthy of its steep cost. Sunlight slanted across the wilderness sector, illuminating clusters of low brush and uneven ground. The first few hours of the hunt passed in uneasy calm. Group A advanced with scanning equipment that picked up body heat and motion. They hoped to detect any living presence moving across a broad area. Their system registered occasional blips, likely small animals darting between rocks, but nothing that matched the size or speed they were anticipating. Group B established a tight formation on higher ground, setting up observation posts overlooking depressions and canyons. Their ex-military operatives used binoculars to survey ridges and pathways, radioing their findings to the main group. Every half hour they shifted positions, always seeking the best vantage points. They remained patient, convinced their discipline would pay off. Group C moved methodically through terrain marked by thorny shrubs and tangled vines. Their leader chose a route that skirted natural obstacles, preserving their energy and limiting random encounters. One of his subordinates carried a black metal case, glancing at it from time to time. The group maintained a low profile, speaking in brief whispers only when necessary. They avoided the open, traveling through patches of vegetation that concealed their progress. In the ranch's control center, various screens displayed each group's slow advances. The ranch owner stood with his arms folded, observing. He took note of how Group A relied on technology that might fail in unexpected circumstances. He watched Group B's deliberate maneuvers, appreciating their discipline. His attention lingered on Group C, impressed by their cautious approach. Yet his gaze shifted periodically to the feed covering a dense grove of mesquite trees, where signs of something large occasionally flickered among the shadows. Around midday, Group A found faint tracks in soft dirt near a dry creek bed. Confident they had a lead, they followed the trail deeper into a narrow stretch lined with sharp rocks. Their sensors began to malfunction, showing intermittent readings. Without warning, they lost connection with the main unit that relayed data to their tablets. The team's leader cursed under his breath and ordered a manual sweep. Several men advanced, rifles raised, scanning the surroundings for movement. A sudden, violent disturbance erupted from the far side of the creek bed. They heard a guttural sound that sent an unexpected jolt through even the most experienced among them. Before they could react, two of their members were gone, pulled into the brush with terrifying speed. The others opened fire wildly, bullets ricocheting off rocks and burrowing into tree trunks. They never got a clear look at the assailant. Panic set in as the survivors scrambled to regroup. One man shouted for reinforcements. Another tried to raise the ranch owner on a secure channel but received only static. Confusion reigned, and the group retreated, dragging one wounded member whose arm bore deep lacerations. They realized they had underestimated this foe. Meanwhile, Group B picked up the echo of gunfire in the distance. Their leader decided to hold position rather than rush in blind. He reasoned that fear might drive the unknown quarry into an open area, where his sharpshooters could capitalize. Yet as minutes passed, no figure emerged, and the gunshots subsided. A tense silence followed, broken only by the wind and faint rustling of brush. Group C continued its careful journey, eventually reaching a rocky slope overlooking a winding arroyo. Their leader signaled them to pause. From this vantage, they glimpsed the remains of a newly abandoned campsite, Scattered footprints and broken branches suggested a quick departure. One subordinate knelt, examining a piece of shredded fabric. Without speaking, he placed it in a pouch, as though collecting evidence. They moved on, leaving no trace of their presence. In a private observation chamber, the ranch owner monitored the situation. He spoke quietly to a trusted aide, asking for a status report on the radio transmissions. Confirming that Group A had requested backup, the aide asked if they should dispatch rescue support. The ranch owner merely shook his head, stating that the contract allowed no interference. He reminded his staff that each participant was responsible for handling whatever lay beyond the boundary. Returning to the screens, he noticed that Group A had sustained casualties, which did not surprise him. Their reliance on complicated gear made them vulnerable to unexpected disruptions. Group B had not yet encountered direct conflict, maintaining their formation. Group C looked unhurried, proceeding with an unsettling confidence. The ranch owner suspected they had an advantage beyond conventional tactics. By late afternoon, the disoriented remnants of Group A sought higher ground to establish an emergency camp. They treated their wounded man with basic medical supplies, uncertain if he would survive the night. None of them doubted that the creature stalking them possessed abnormal strength and ferocity. Though they had not witnessed its full form, they understood that they had crossed into something far beyond typical hunts. Darkness had settled over the remote valleys when Group B decided to establish a provisional alliance with the survivors from Group A. The politician who led B had a pragmatic mindset. He understood that their combined assets could improve their odds of neutralizing the threat roaming the wilderness. He offered advanced weaponry, secure satellite phones, and well-trained shooters. In exchange, Group A would share extra vehicles, specialized surveillance equipment, and any inside knowledge gleaned from their earlier encounter. Night winds stirred loose branches overhead, creating sporadic noises that raised tension among the exhausted individuals. A few from Group A trembled at the memory of the violent assault that had taken their comrades. The politician's men offered them fresh batteries for night vision goggles, plus a temporary feeling of safety. Yet both sides sensed the partnership held fragile foundations, contingent upon mutual benefit. Self-preservation remained paramount, and they accepted that betrayal could emerge at any moment. Farther across the rugged terrain, the mafia boss and his retinue continued their measured progress. They left no trail, speaking in hushed tones that carried an unsettling confidence. It seemed as if they were aware of every hazard lurking in the darkness. Their leader seldom paused to consult a map. He advanced with calm assurance, watching for any sign of the roaming adversary. He exuded a certainty that suggested deeper knowledge of what prowled these lonely paths. Now and then, one of his men made a subtle reference to a specialized substance locked in a small steel container carried at the center of the formation. Whispers indicated it derived from a remote Amazonian plant, rumored to immobilize dangerous creatures. They mentioned it only in passing, making sure not to divulge excessive details. Their tone implied they possessed a trump card. Others might rely on brute force, but they had prepared something far more insidious. In the ranch's primary monitoring station, the owner watched multiple screens in quiet anticipation. He observed the tenuous cooperation forming between Group A and Group B, and he regarded Group C's discreet movements with a trace of satisfaction. A handful of his staff offered discreet commentary, noting that Group A's numbers had diminished. The politician's men appeared professional, though a sense of impending discord hovered. The owner's silence suggested he intended for events to unfold as planned. Through an intercom link, he received updates on minor skirmishes in the outer sections of the designated zone. Small predators occasionally surprised unwary hunters, and thick vegetation hindered movement. Rain threatened, and dense clouds obscured the moonlight. The owner gave a curt order to maintain readiness, but discouraged any direct intervention. He wanted the tension to rise. He wanted the participants to feel isolated. Outside assistance would erode the authenticity of what he had engineered. Shortly before midnight, a small team from Group A ventured into a narrow ravine, guided by coordinates shared by the politician's men. They carried flashlights flickering in the damp air, casting wavering beams on steep walls. Their hearts pounded from exhaustion and dread. One man spotted fresh scratches on a boulder, arranged in an odd pattern, as if carved by claws. Another noticed a faint metallic scent carried on the breeze, hinting at unseen violence. Soon they encountered an advance scout from Group B who signaled them to proceed quietly. In a hushed tone, he explained that an agreement had been reached to pool resources and confront the primary target together. Group A's weary members accepted the plan, aware their survival chances depended on cooperation. Yet distrust lingered. In the back of their minds, they suspected the politician's loyalty extended only as far as his advantage reached. A single miscalculation might prove fatal. Elsewhere, the mafia boss and his men reached higher ground overlooking a shallow basin. By moonlight, they observed flickers of flashlights from the newly merged factions below. One subordinate whispered that the groups seemed disorganized. Another confirmed the presence of confusion among them. The mafia boss nodded once, then gestured toward a side route that dipped into shadow. He showed no sign of immediate aggression. His composure hinted at a different objective, one not shared by the others. Rain began to patter across the zone, soaking the undergrowth and drenching any figure caught outside. Tired, nervous, and suspicious, the alliance between Group A and Group B braced for whatever lay ahead, unaware of how closely the mafia boss tracked their progress. In the command center, the ranch owner observed it all without emotion. He expected nothing less. A grim hush settled over the hunting zone as midnight passed. Sparse moonlight filtered through thick clouds and rain intensified, soaking the uneven earth. Flooded gullies and slippery rocks complicated every step. The newly formed alliance between Group A and Group B pressed onward, guided by rough coordinates and flickering flashlights. The politicians' hired combat experts took the lead, scanning the darkness for movement. Their breath formed faint vapor in the cold night air. Several men from Group A struggled to keep pace. They nursed injuries from earlier encounters, and fatigue weighed heavily on them. Their bodies ached, and the steady downpour dampened morale. Still, they clung to the hope that combined firepower might offer some protection. The politician believed that unified efforts could corner the dangerous foe somewhere in the deeper reaches of the wilderness. At intervals, the group halted to regroup and share observations. Dripping wet, they described a trail of unsettling signs. Broken branches, unusual footprints, and scattered remains of small animals. One ex-military operative from Group B quietly noted that the target seemed to manipulate the environment to its advantage, using natural cover to stage sudden strikes. He recommended spacing out into a staggered formation to reduce vulnerability. Not far away, the mafia boss and his men navigated a winding path along a shallow creek. The water level rose rapidly, forcing them to ford sections that lapped around their knees. They moved without complaint. Their leader maintained an unhurried demeanor, signaling his subordinates to keep their weapons dry. When lightning flashed, he paused to scan the surrounding brush, seemingly unafraid of what might lurk there. In a distant corridor of the zone, The ranch owners' surveillance teams noted an uptick in radio chatter among the merged factions. Operators tracked the shifting positions on digital maps, watching Group A and Group B converge in an area dotted with thick stands of mesquite. The mafia boss's location appeared unconnected at first glance, but the ranch owner observed a pattern. Group C advanced along an arc that would eventually flank the others, positioning themselves advantageously. Lightning revealed silhouettes bounding across a ridge where craggy rocks jutted from the ground. A watchful mercenary from Group B spotted movement and shouted a warning. Within seconds, confusion erupted. Muzzle flashes cut through the rain, gunshots echoed, and men scrambled for cover behind boulders or thick tree trunks. The encounter was brief, but it left one more body on the muddy ground. In the aftermath, the combined groups discovered that they had fired at a fleeting shape before it vanished into darkness. The torn remains of a fallen man testified to the speed and ferocity of the attacker. Fear rippled through the alliance. The politician's features grew taut, and he conferred with a senior operative. They agreed on the need to push forward, believing retreat would invite further ambushes. Shortly before daybreak, a violent downpour battered the region. Streams overflowed, turning low-lying paths into quagmires. Several hunters were forced to abandon heavy gear. One man from Group A lost his footing and tumbled into a ditch, sustaining a fractured ankle. The group dragged him out, but morale continued to plummet. Tensions flared when a few men accused others of withholding key intel or misdirecting the expedition. The politician intervened, insisting that accusations could wait until they secured a safe area. Farther east, the mafia boss and his retinue crossed a soggy clearing where old animal traps lay rusting. They encountered minimal resistance, suggesting that the real threat was concentrated elsewhere. With the slightest nod, the boss indicated a route leading uphill to a rocky plateau. Visibility was poor, yet his confidence did not waver. One of his men occasionally checked a device inside a sealed case, ensuring that the special compound remained intact and ready. By early dawn, the battered alliance of Group A and Group B reached a dense marsh near the foot of a steep ridge. Exhausted, they huddled under drooping branches, taking stock of lost supplies. Rain continued to pour. The politician urged them to press on, convinced the target might be cornered along the ridge. A few men expressed open doubt, but they complied. Suddenly, a shriek echoed from the edge of the marsh. A figure leaped through the wet brush, ripping into two men before the rest could react. It was too fast to track clearly in the dim light. A barrage of bullets whizzed through the tangled vegetation, striking nothing but soggy ground and dripping foliage. When the group's flashlights converged, the killer was gone, leaving behind mangled bodies and renewed terror. Faint daylight crept across the drenched marsh, revealing a scene of chaos. Group A and Group B attempted to reorganize after the brutal ambush. Two men lay dead, and another clung to life with severe wounds. Their allies crouched near shallow pools, scanning the perimeter for signs of further attacks. The politician crouched beside a fallen comrade, his expression grim. Survival now eclipsed any ambition he had brought to this hunt. A sudden burst of static crackled over a shared channel. A voice announced a possible sighting of the adversary near an outcropping of jagged rocks. The politician and a handful of armed men decided to investigate. They picked their way through waterlogged brush, climbing the ridge in single file. Wet clothing clung to their bodies, and their boots sank with each step. Their breath rasped in the damp air. On the other side of the terrain, the mafia boss and his men reached a narrow pass littered with fractured boulders. They moved swiftly, showing no hesitation. One subordinate carried the steel container, shielding it from the rain beneath his jacket. When they emerged into a small clearing, they halted, spotting a large figure hunched at the far edge. It moved with uncanny quickness, slipping behind a rock formation before they could fire. The Mafia boss signaled for calm, gesturing for his men to spread out. Their weapons remained raised, but they did not open fire blindly. One man retrieved a canister from the steel container, attaching it to a small device that resembled a handheld sprayer. With a subtle motion, the boss directed him to prime it. A chemical hiss filled the damp air as the apparatus pressurized. Their actions suggested advanced knowledge of how to incapacitate the creature. Meanwhile, a few scattered survivors from Group A and Group B struggled uphill, following the politician's trail. Rain had eased, but thick fog drifted through the trees. Footsteps slid on wet stones. One of the politician's men glimpsed flickers of movement ahead, raising his rifle. Before he could act, a swift shape lunged from the side, tearing him from the path. Shouts filled the air, followed by frantic gunfire. A painful cry rang out, then went silent. Near the rocky clearing, the Mafia boss's plan took shape. With careful coordination, his men fanned out, driving the hidden target into a confined pocket between sheer walls. Despite the creature's impressive agility, it found itself herded by overlapping fields of fire. Then the subordinate activated the specialized sprayer, releasing a transparent gas that spread quickly. The effect was immediate. The massive figure's speed faltered, its movements became sluggish, and it stumbled to its knees. As the creature tried to rise, the Mafia boss nodded once. Two of his men lunged forward with metal restraints, catching the weakened being off guard. The boss stepped closer, observing the subdued quarry with a steady gaze. He signaled for them to hold it in place, ensuring the gas continued to pour from the canister. The target thrashed weakly, eyes filled with wild defiance, but its powerful resistance ebbed. Within moments, a ragged group of survivors from the other faction stumbled into view, drawn by the commotion. Their clothes were torn and their faces showed desperation. They saw the Mafia boss standing triumphant over the subdued adversary. Hope flickered in their expressions. They assumed that maybe they could join forces now. Yet the Mafia boss offered no invitation. His men turned their weapons on the newcomers without hesitation. Gunfire erupted. The survivors had little chance. Exhausted and unprepared, they fell before they could retreat or defend themselves. One man attempted to shout for mercy, but a single bullet silenced him. In less than a minute, the clearing fell quiet again, littered with fresh corpses. The Mafia boss surveyed the carnage impassively. He reached into a pocket and produced a small satellite phone using a secure frequency to contact the ranch owner. Their exchange was short. The boss murmured that everything had proceeded according to plan, referencing minimal complications. A static-laced reply conveyed satisfaction. The Mafia boss ended the call, then directed his men to carry the immobilized captive deeper into the property. Those final holdouts from Groups A and B never had a chance to plead for rescue. The Mafia boss had orchestrated every step, ensuring the adversary remained alive but helpless, while rival participants were systematically eliminated. This outcome had been in motion from the start. Now, with the sedative gas still in effect, the captive posed little immediate danger. In the shifting fog, the Mafia boss led his retinue away from the bloody scene. They moved at a controlled pace, escorting the restrained creature as though it were a prized trophy. No one spoke. Their silence held a ruthless finality, underscoring that their victory here was by design, not fortune. The hunt, for them, had concluded. They had secured the ultimate reward while leaving only corpses behind. A veil of morning sunlight broke through dissipating storm clouds as the mafia boss and his entourage transported their living captive toward a heavily guarded sector of the ranch. Barbed wire fences and patrolling sentries announced a zone rarely seen by outsiders. Electronic gates opened upon confirmation of a code transmitted from a small handheld device. Inside waited a sparse courtyard surrounded by austere concrete walls. A black SUV pulled up near the entrance. The ranch owner emerged, stepping into the courtyard with measured calm. He wore practical clothing now, no need for showmanship in this private space. He greeted the mafia boss with a minimal nod, then eyed the restrained figure lying on the ground. The captive's limbs were bound in reinforced shackles, and its chest rose and fell with labored breaths. Residual effects of the Amazonian gas kept it from struggling effectively. The two men spoke in low voices, their conversation masked from nearby guards by the wind and the hum of electric security systems. Although only snatches of their dialogue were audible, it became clear they had orchestrated the entire scenario. The ranch owner had hosted the hunt as a trap for certain influential figures who needed elimination. The mafia boss had provided the exotic captive and the means to subdue it. They had used the illusions of a grandiose contest to lure those wealthy competitors to their deaths. Inside a nearby structure, the mafia boss and the ranch owner convened in a small control room overlooking the courtyard through a reinforced window. A table with scattered documents and laptop screens indicated meticulous planning. One document displayed a list of names, many of them now crossed out. The ranch owner brushed his hand across the paper, remarking that each name represented a powerful rival or obstacle. Several lines of text suggested that removing these individuals through conventional methods, like hired killers, would have caused political fallout or legal repercussions. In contrast, orchestrating a deadly hunting expedition offered a twisted form of plausible deniability. The public would believe these people simply vanished or suffered accidents while indulging in illicit pursuits. Evidence of wrongdoing would be obscured within miles of private land, guarded by the ranch's formidable security. A guard stepped in briefly to report that final sweeps confirmed no surviving intruders in the designated zone. That meant groups A and B were effectively eliminated. The mafia boss raised an eyebrow. The ranch owner nodded, indicating satisfaction. Their plan had succeeded without major complications. Profits remained intact, and the path to certain business expansions now lay open. A faint groan from the courtyard signaled that the captive was regaining partial awareness. The ranch owner and mafia boss proceeded outside to examine the creature. It attempted to rise, but the chains prevented any real movement. Its eyes flickered with a mixture of exhaustion and fury. The mafia boss gestured to a subordinate, who administered another dose of the specialized gas via a handheld sprayer. The captive's struggles weakened. They spoke quietly about what to do next. The mafia boss mentioned the possibility of transporting this being to a remote facility, possibly overseas. He explained that certain bidders might pay exorbitantly for a living specimen with such rare attributes. The ranch owner seemed to weigh the options, considering the potential risk. He noted that keeping the creature on site offered unique leverage, but also posed dangers if it ever broke free. Their conversation revealed a long-standing partnership. They referenced past dealings in illicit trade, including smuggling contraband and eliminating mutual adversaries. The ranch owner's respectable public image shielded them from scrutiny. Meanwhile, the mafia boss operated in the shadows, ensuring tasks were executed efficiently. Together, they had orchestrated one of the deadliest hunts imaginable, destroying prominent rivals under the guise of elite sport. A moment of reflection passed as they regarded the chained figure. The mafia boss allowed himself a trace of satisfaction. He pointed out that no one else truly understood the captive's nature or the extent of its capabilities. Without his specialized Amazonian compound, the entire plan might have collapsed. The ranch owner acknowledged the critical importance of that resource, recognizing the mafia boss as an essential partner rather than a mere hired asset. Additional personnel arrived, some carrying instruments designed for medical restraint. They awaited orders, prepared to relocate the captive into a fortified enclosure if necessary. The ranch owner exchanged a meaningful glance with the mafia boss, indicating that the next phase of their arrangement would proceed soon. There was no rush. They held all the power. Above the courtyard, the sun rose higher, illuminating the still wet concrete and reflecting off puddles left by the night's storm. Guards stood at intervals, weapons in hand. No sounds of conflict remained, only the subdued breathing of the captive and the low hum of security equipment. In this enclosed world, the two architects of betrayal observed their success with unspoken pride. The hunt had concluded precisely as intended, leaving them with one living trophy to use as they pleased. A subdued tension hung in the air as the mafia boss and the ranch owner finalized their private discussion. Armed sentries formed a loose perimeter around the courtyard, keeping curious staff away. In the center stood a large steel cage brought in specifically for containing the captive. Workers bolted it in place with pneumatic tools, ensuring each panel locked tightly. The creature, still weakened from repeated doses of the specialized gas, lay motionless on the concrete. The mafia boss stepped forward, examining the cage. He ran a gloved hand across the bars, testing their solidity. His men stood nearby, rifles at the ready. One guard activated a mechanism that swung the heavy cage door open. With precise commands, they maneuvered the captive inside, dragging chains over the slick surface. Another guard secured the door, snapping multiple locks in place. From a short distance, the ranch owner observed, arms folded. His posture conveyed neither pity nor hesitation. He had invested considerable resources in crafting this enclosure, ordering its construction months in advance after reviewing the captive's rumored abilities. Thick steel plating, reinforced joints, and an integrated sedation system ensured that any violent outburst could be suppressed. The captive's eyes fluttered open, scanning the bars with a look of rage and desperation. It strained against the chains, attempting to stand. A labored growl rose from its throat, but the mafia boss signaled one of his subordinates to administer a minimal burst of the gas. That hiss brought immediate compliance, leaving the creature half-conscious and slumped. In the calm that followed, the mafia boss let out a quiet remark. He noted that he could have hired an assassin to dispatch the targeted VIPs, but that held no thrill. He wanted them to experience real fear, to confront something far more savage than a bullet from the shadows. The ranch owner nodded in silent agreement, his gaze fixed on the captive. They both understood that orchestrating the demise of those powerful figures under the guise of a lethal safari provided an unmatched sense of control. The conversation shifted to future ventures. The mafia boss mentioned potential buyers who might fund subsequent hunts, each more extreme than the last. The ranch owner spoke of expanding the ranch's hidden perimeter to host even larger events, possibly involving additional exotic acquisitions. Neither expressed moral qualms. They focused on logistics, profits, and the importance of secrecy. One misstep could draw unwanted attention from federal agencies, but their network of bribes and political favors had served them well so far. As they talked, the creature in the cage stirred, eyes flicking between its captors. Its breathing quickened, and it tested the steel bars with a trembling hand. The steel did not yield. The mafia boss watched with fascination. He recounted how he had first encountered rumors of this being in a remote settlement near the Amazon River. Through a series of covert arrangements, he orchestrated its capture, harnessing local contacts and the specialized toxin derived from a rare flower. The ranch owner listened, his expression betraying neither shock nor remorse. He simply asked if the creature would remain subdued long enough for transport, should they decide to move it. The mafia boss answered that additional canisters of gas were stored nearby, ensuring compliance. For a moment, a faint grin crossed the ranch owner's features, as if he relished the possibilities this living trophy presented. Time dragged. The captive made another attempt at standing. Several guards raised their weapons, but the mafia boss waved them off. He wanted to see the captive's resolve. Chains rattled, and the cage groaned under pressure, yet the specialized restraints, combined with lingering sedation, proved too strong. The captive sank back, silent fury etched across its face. Eventually, the mafia boss and the ranch owner retreated to a sheltered awning to review documents on a tablet. They referenced shipping routes, potential allies, and the disposal of any evidence linking them to the hunt's grisly outcome. No remorse tinged their words. They regarded every life taken as part of a larger strategy, something necessary to consolidate power and eliminate troublesome figures from their world. As the sun climbed higher, the ranch owner excused himself to make a phone call. He confirmed new business contracts, speaking in a composed tone that revealed none of the atrocities committed the previous night. Meanwhile, the mafia boss signaled his men to prepare vehicles for departure. He planned to remain off-site for a while, handling other affairs, but he left a few trusted enforcers behind to ensure the captive stayed contained.